Hello everyone, and today we're going to be taking the calipers on this S550 Mustang and painting it to match this beautiful twister orange. So let's get started. And for our first step, we're going to grab our 21mm socket and our breaker bar, and we're going to break loose all the lug nuts on all four wheels. The whole idea is you want to make sure this is loose before you lift up the vehicle. And with all the lug nuts loose, let's go ahead and lift up the vehicle, and we're going to use our service jack and jack stands. The whole idea is I want to take all four wheels off at once. That way when we start the paint process, we can transition from one wheel to the other. And with the jack stand in place, we can lower the vehicle. And I'm going to place the pin in there just to make sure it's secure. There we go. And then we can move on to the other three wheels. And let's take a quick look at our work. It does look like the vehicle is lifting evenly, and I can see an air gap under each wheel. Alright, we're off to a good start. So let's go ahead and grab our 21mm socket, and let's go ahead and finish loosening up all these lug nuts. Now most of them should be finger tight, but you never know. And then once all 5 lug nuts are off, go ahead and take off each wheel. We'll start with the front on both of them, and then move our way to the back and do the same thing. Next, I'm going to take a little bit of paracord, and I want to support the front calipers. So I'm going to loop it around the top pin of the caliper, and then tie it to the strut spring. That way when you unbolt it, it's not hanging by the brake hose. You do not want that to happen at all, so we're going to support it first. And as you tie it off, give yourself just a little bit of slack so you can move the caliper around as you paint it. So let's go ahead and pan over the next bolts we need to remove. Now this is behind the front caliper. There's 2 bolts we need to focus on. One right there at the top. And let's see if I move my camera around down there. There we go. And we're going to move this guy right here. So I wanted to pan over these 2 bolts. That way you could see what I'm working on just in case the camera angle's not great. So now let's go ahead and grab our 15mm socket and socket wrench, and let's go ahead and remove the 2 bolts that are holding on the brake caliper. Now they are on there pretty good, so you might have to give it a little bit of oomph just to break them loose. And come on, a little stiff. There it goes. And we're going to have to use a wrench to fully take this bolt off just because of where the brake line is. So when you get towards the end, just go ahead and use a wrench and start inching it off. And then once it becomes finger tight, it should be able to remove somewhat easily. So that one's loose. And then I work my way to the bottom one as well. And yep, there's the bottom one. And now I can remove the top one. And there we go. And this should slide right off with a little bit of finesse. Come on, come on. And there we go. And as you take the brake caliper off, sometimes the rotor comes loose as well. So we're going to remove that and set that aside. And with our brake caliper suspended, let's go and grab some soapy water and a nylon brush. And let's clean off all the dirt and grease that's on the caliper. We want the cleanest surface possible when painting these. The cleaner the surface, the better the paint will adhere to the caliper. And once we spray with soapy water, just take your nylon brush and scrub it down really good. So any area that you see any dirt or grease really built up on, just scrub harder. But if these areas fight you too much, you may need something a little bit more abrasive. So go ahead and grab a brass brush. Just stay away from the steel brushes for this task. And after several minutes of scrubbing, we can rinse off our calipers. So this is just basic tapware I'm just spraying on this. And you can always apply a generous amount. It's not going to hurt to apply too much. We want to make sure all the soapy water is removed when painting these calipers. So just go ahead and make sure you get every nook and cranny. And then once we think we got everything off, grab your shop towel and go ahead and wipe everything down. This will accelerate the drying process. And let's do a quick inspection, just to make sure there's no dirt or grease left behind. So far the caliper looks pretty good. I think we're ready to move on. So while the front ones are drying, let's move our way to the rear calipers. Same process, I'm going to take some paracord and we're going to support the rear calipers before we unbolt them. So I'm going to go ahead and tie it off the same way. And then go ahead and grab your 14mm socket and socket wrench, and let's go ahead and bolt the 2 caliper bolts. And these come off fairly easy. These aren't on there very tight at all. So once you get a little oomph in there, there we go. And they should be able to come out by hand. So there's 1, and there's 2. And with a little bit of finesse, go ahead and take off your brake caliper. Now be prepared, your brake pads may come off with it. Yep, just like that. The front one came off and one of the springs came with it. So I'll set that spring aside. And I'll just go ahead and remove the brake pads and set those aside as well. And now we have room to pan over our next bolts. There's 1 right here, and there should be 1 at the bottom. There's that guy. Those are the 2 we need to remove. So let's go ahead and grab our 18mm socket and socket wrench, and we're going to go ahead and crack these loose. Now these are on there very good, so you're going to have to use a lot of finesse. And come on. So that one we broke loose, and work on the top one. And there we go. So that one's cracked loose. So there's 1 bolt and 2 bolts. And once you remove the last bolt, the anchor plate basically falls off. And you can see it just came off very easily. So now we can remove our spring clips. And these come off just as easy. All they got to do is pull apart. So there's 1, and there's 2. And now we get to repeat the same cleaning process on the rear calipers as we did as the front. You're going to spray it down with soapy water, grab your nylon brush, and go ahead and scrub it down really good. Then we'll take our water and our shop towels and rinse everything off just to make sure there's no soapy residue left behind. And while the calipers are drying, we can go ahead and move our way to the anchor plates. And again, same process, grab your soapy water. Now for this one, we had to use not only the nylon brush, but we had to use the brass brush as well, because there are some areas that the grease and the buildup was really bad, so we had to scrub in there really good. And once that was done, we grabbed our water, rinsed it down, same process, and then we set them aside in the sun. Now we can work our way back to the front calipers and we can prep the paint area. So grab your painter's tape and tape off every area you don't want paint. So we're going to start at the top of the caliper, that way we don't get any paint on our pads or on those pins. So I took some painter's tape, taped it off, and then took a razor blade just to outline that one area. Now this part does require a lot of patience, because the more work you put here, the less eyesores and overspray you're going to have in other parts later on. And with the top side taped off, now we did the same process on the bottom of the caliper. Same thing, take your painter's tape, press down, make sure you get every nook and cranny covered you don't want painted, such as the brake pads. Now once I've done this, I'm doing something a little exotic. There's a molding seam line that I'm using as a guide for my razor blade. And that's where I'm going to stop the tape area. For you, if you want, you don't have to use that one spot. You can paint a little bit deeper or more towards the inner part of the calipers. We didn't for this process. And so far it's not looking too shabby. I want to go ahead and cover up the bolt holes as well, just so I don't get paint on the threads. And all that's pretty easy. All you gotta do is apply a little bit of tape and then take your razor blade and just cut around the outline of it. And don't forget to cover the bleeder valve as well. And off camera I went ahead and taped off the brake line. Just about anything that's rubber, make sure you tape it off or put a drop cloth on it. And that's what I'm doing here, so that we don't get paint on anywhere else within the wheel well. And now that the front is dry, we can do the same thing on the rear. Taped off the bleeder valve. There we go. And then I went ahead and taped off the inside of the caliper itself. The whole idea is I want to tape off any rubber areas or where the cylinder is, just to make sure I don't get paint on that cylinder area. So anywhere that the brake pads are, in a sense. And that looks pretty good, not too shabby at all. And now we can work our way to the back of the caliper. Pretty much I'm going to start with the brake line and do all the items back there, such as the parking brake as well. So you can see that I'm just applying tape just about everything I don't want paint on at all. And just because of personal preference, I add a little bit of tape to the back of the caliper just to provide a little bit of separation between where the paint stops and starts. And now we can go ahead and move to the anchor plates. Now as we said earlier, we want to tape off any area that's rubber. We don't want paint on these boots. So I'm just going to apply one little thin layer of tape just to isolate them. And same thing with the front calipers. I want to go ahead and isolate the bolt holes and just take my razor blade and trim those out as well. And of course, we'll set up our drop cloth as well, just to make sure we don't paint anything inside that wheel well, or at least try not to. And with our wheel wells prepped, now we can apply a little bit of grease remover. Now this grease remover came with our paint kit, which is pretty cool. So all you do is spray it right on your calipers, like so. You can always apply a nice hefty amount. And then take a shop towel and make sure you wipe all of it off. This is pretty much equivalent to rubbing alcohol, so if you don't have this spray, you may use that instead. And we'll go ahead and spray down our rear caliper as well. Clean those off with a shop towel. They look pretty shiny, that's a good sign. And don't forget to get your anchor plates, so we're going to spray this one down as well. You can never be too clean when it comes to your paint parts. And for our very last paint prep step, we need to set up a drop cloth for each wheel well. In a sense, I'm making a paint booth for each wheel. That way we don't send paint anywhere else up and down the car. And now we get to the fun steps. Go ahead and grab your caliper paint and make sure you shake it for 2 minutes. Then go ahead and grab that red cap on top of the can. And we're going to place it on the valve at the bottom of the can. This is where that stem is right there. And it should fit right on top. There we go. Then go ahead and put the can on the ground and apply a lot of force. This may take a little bit of oomph. There we go. So once you hit snap, it actually starts mixing, and go ahead and hold it down for a few seconds just to make sure that you get all that hardener mixed in. Then go ahead and shake it for another 2 minutes. This is very critical that you do that. And now we're ready to do a test spray, so I'll check it upside down. Very nice. Okay, so it is orange paint. That's a good sign. And now we can go ahead and start doing thin layers of paint on our part. So start spraying before the part and then after the part. And something very important to note, make sure you have your safety glasses and respirator when using this type of paint. That's very important. It's always safety first. I mean, as you can see, we're in our little mini paint booth here, and you can see that we're keeping all the fumes within this one little area, so you definitely need a respirator when doing this project. And with our first coat complete on the front, let's work our way to the back. Same process, we're going to start spraying before the part and continue spraying until after the part. And we want to make sure we get every nook and cranny we can when painting these, because these calipers have very odd angles. So I'm going to pick it up by the painter's tape just to get in these weird areas. So you can see I picked it up right there and then spray right in the front. Because right now, if I left it the way it was, that would look very weird when it's all said and done. And it's always good to have gloves because I can always paint over my gloves and then change them out. And then I saved the easiest for last, which were the anchor plates. I was able to put those on a piece of cardboard and spray both of them at the same time. So it just made our job a little easier. And with this one, same thing. Just go back and forth and make sure you get every nook and cranny. And after 30 minutes have passed, I went ahead and applied a second coat of paint. Now I did this off camera because it's the same process we did earlier. I didn't want to bore you too much. And so far looking at this came out looking really good. These calipers came out looking very nice. I'm very pleased how this came out. So this is very promising. And just because we can and we were looking at nice paint, let's take a look at the passenger side as well. Oh man, yeah, that caliper came out looking really good. I'm very happy with that result. Now just as an FYI, I did start removing some of the drop cloths just out of a little bit of excitement.
3 hours later.
And after 3 hours, it looks like these calipers were dry to the touch. Now the can does say wait about 6 to 7 hours, but it was a very hot day and these were sitting out in the sun. So I'm going to go ahead and start removing the painter's tape just so we can start reinstalling these calipers. The trick is we just got to be very gentle and very patient just to make sure these calipers don't bump up against anything. That way we don't scratch any of the paint because it is still drying. And now that we're past the halfway point, let's go ahead and clean off our brake rotors with our brake and parts cleaner and some shop towels just to make sure there's no grease on there from when we took them off earlier. And then go ahead and install it on the hub. Just make sure you don't hit the caliper with it because you don't want to scratch that beautiful orange paint we just did. So there we go. And then while holding everything up, go ahead and grab your knife and cut away that paracord so you can drop your caliper down a little bit. And make sure you hold everything with 2 hands. We're going to place it right on top of that rotor. There we go. And while holding everything with my knees, let me apply a little bit of thread locking compound to these bolts. So there's 1. And then there's 2. And let's see if we can tighten these up without hitting anything. And once your caliper bolts are nice and snug, go ahead and grab your torque wrench and we're going to torque them down to 85 foot-pounds. Very nice. And with the front ones complete, let's go ahead and work our way to the rear. I'm going to go ahead and remove what's left of these drop cloths. Then we'll go ahead and grab our brake and parts cleaner, and we're going to clean off our old springs. They're still fairly new, so all I'm going to do is get the brake dust off of them. And after the springs dried out, we can install it on the anchor plate, and these press right in. There's nothing difficult about it. So let's see if we get one aligned, press right in. Very nice. Do the other side as well. And these press right down. There's nothing much to them. Yeah, we'll get that little guy out of there. Get out of there. And so far, come on. There we go. Looks very nice. So all we have to do now is install our anchor plate and bolts. So we'll go ahead and put it in position. Set the caliper right there just so we don't lose it. And go ahead and apply a little bit of thread locking compound to these bolts. And we'll start threading them by hand. Apply a little one to the bottom one as well. Same thing, we'll start feeding it by hand. And then we'll grab our 18mm socket and socket wrench and get them snug. And then we'll torque them down to 129 foot-pounds. Next, we're going to go ahead and grab our needle nose pliers and we're going to rotate the caliper piston clockwise. The whole idea is we want this piston to go in a little bit. Now we don't have the tool for this, but needle nose pliers will do the same job. And we're almost done. So all we got to do is take our brake pads and some brake grease. And we're going to apply a nice thin coat of brake grease on the back of these pads. You want to go very thin. You do not want them on the front of the pads. Just a little bit on the back. Make it sure it's a nice thin coat. Pretty much you want a median in between metal touches metal. And that's what we're doing here. And I'll make sure I'm applying a nice thin coat. You do not want too much. And then we'll go ahead and install it in the anchor plate. Just make sure I don't touch the rotor. Come on. There we go. It slid right in. And do the same thing from the rear brake pad as well. Now for these pads, they do have brake springs, so I'm going to insert one at the bottom and then one at the top. Now for these, it's easier to install once you get the caliper at least on the pads so they don't spring right off on you. So I'm going to put the caliper right on top of them and then go ahead and disconnect my support for the caliper. And then when that's done, we can install our brake caliper bolts. And these are not very difficult at all and they don't require a lot of torque, so make sure you get them snug with your 14mm socket and socket wrench. And then after that, we can torque it down to 24 foot-pounds. And now we can grab our needle nose pliers so we can install those pad springs. Now I did it with the caliper on, however if it does fight you, just unbolt the caliper and lift it up slightly. And before we install the wheels, let's take a look at our work. So far that front caliper looks pretty good. Let's take a look at the rear. Oh man, these came out looking really good. And for the last inning stretch, all we gotta do is install all 4 of our wheels and lug nuts. So I'm gonna use my knee and kind of press against the wheel a little bit so it doesn't actually hit the caliper. And make sure you start finger tighten all of these lug nuts. I wanna get them snug just with the wrench. And with all 4 wheels installed, now we can lower the vehicle. And for our very last step, let's torque down every one of these lug nuts to 150 foot-pounds, and make sure you do this in a star pattern. So let's see if we get in the first one here. This requires a lot of oomph. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Well, hopefully you found this video helpful or entertaining. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe.